Hey, I'm Kenneth Wajda. I'm a professional photographer here in Colorado. Welcome to another one of my weekly photo chats. So today I want to talk about getting the shot and doing what it takes, even if it means admitting to mistakes and going back. So I was walking in a little town nearby called Castle Rock and carrying my Rolleiflex and walking around. I wanted to shoot one roll of film while I was in this little town and meet some people. And I walked into a coffee shop, and right away the young guy working behind the counter said, "Oh, I'm a film photographer too. Look at that. That's beautiful." So I said, "Can I photograph you?" And he said, "Yes." And I went into a little antique emporium, and I thought it was going to be full of antiques, but it really wasn't. It was mostly full of gifts and nothing like vintage old stuff. And there was one counter that was a candy counter, and it was a little candy corner, and this one case looked like something right out of 1900, an old oak case with a glass front. And I noticed that, and then I left because there was nobody there. And I went out to my car, and I went and saw a woman pulling some things out of her car next to me, and I said, "Hey, can I ask you a question? Are there any local antique shops here that actually have antiques?" And she said, "Nope, everything is not like that. It's all just gifts. There's nothing like that." And I said, "There was like this incredible candy counter in there. That's the only antique I saw." And she goes, "That's my store." So I said, "Let's go in and photograph you at that candy counter, and I'll load the Rolleiflex. Or I'll bring the Rolleiflex." And she said, "Sure." So we go inside. I set up the camera. I shoot. When I was in the coffee shop, there was music playing, there were people talking, and I couldn't really hear the shutter. But the shutter can be kind of quiet on this Rolleiflex. But I did hear that. But I didn't think I heard that day. And then when I photographed the woman with the candy counter, I shot one and I didn't hear it either. And there might have been some noise in there, but so I shot two more. And I said, I'll have a few to choose from because I'm just not sure it's shooting. In fact, I felt like I was pressing the shutter harder than I thought I should have to, trying to get it to go. And I was noticing something was like not working. But if it shoots, then it will advance. If it doesn't shoot, it won't advance. So it did advance. So I'm like, well, it must have shot. And then I went into a bookstore because I like bookstores. And I went into a used bookstore in town, and there's a woman behind the counter, and she sees the Rolleiflex, and she comments on it. And I said, "Well, can I use it to take your portrait?" And she said, "Sure." And I used a book as a tripod, and I shot her at a 15th of a second. And then I walked around town. I shot some other scenes of the town, a little cafe, a couple shots of the famous Castle Rock. There's an actual rock that looks like a castle, and you'll see it in the pictures. I'll put a link to the photos below. That was such a great little roll of film to shoot on one little town, some of the people I met. Except for when I took the film out of the camera and then I tested the shutter, I was looking in the camera and there's no light coming into the camera. And there was some movement of the shutter, but it wasn't opening the lens. And I kept testing it and trying it. I'm like, there is no light coming into that camera. That is why I was fighting it. And I figured it out. There's something wrong with the camera. So I started fiddling with little buttons on it, trying to get it to go, and then it did. And then it started to work. And now it's working again. Now, I don't know why. It does have a little issue with this camera. This camera, it looks like somebody may have had an impact to it because it does, when you shoot an exposure, you do have to pull that release out. That should be spring-loaded back out before you can wind it. And that's a little issue that I'm probably not going to get repaired unless it doesn't keep working. But that was what I noticed, was something was going on where it was working again, but I don't think I had made any photographs. I don't think the coffee shop guy was going to come out. I think it was a blank negative. And I think it was a blank negative with the woman with the candy store. And I think it was a blank negative with the woman at the bookstore. But it was working again, so I loaded a new roll of film and I went back. And I went back to the coffee guy and I said, listen, I don't think that camera was shooting before. Remember I was a little bit concerned I wasn't able to hear it? I don't think it shot. Let's do it again. And then I went back to the bookstore and I said, hey, can I take your portrait again? Reshoot, redo. I don't think it worked before. That shutter, I didn't actually hear it open. I don't think it opened. I went back to the candy counter at that Emporium and unfortunately she wasn't there. So I just photographed the candy counter. And I'll send her a picture of that or bring that to her. But I'll have to explain why she's not in it. Because I had to go back. Because there's no shame, there's no embarrassment with admitting something went wrong. It wasn't anything that I did particularly, even though if it were my own fault, I would also admit to that. But the idea was it's just the camera wasn't working. But now it is. So let's make another portrait. And the coffee shop guy did in the exact same position, same place he was. The bookstore owner, instead of being behind her counter, I brought her actually closer to the window, which made for better light. And I was able to shoot at a 60th of a second. And I really liked the fact that I had a chance to come up with an idea for what to shoot there. So that actually was like an evolution of that photograph. And then the candy counter was the candy counter. And it makes for a nice candy counter photo, but it doesn't have her in it. And someday I'll bring that to her, and if she's there, I'll shoot her and I'll add that and make that photograph for her too. But the beauty is the camera does introduce me to those folks, and those photographs are able to be remade. And you just have to go back. And I was like, I had nowhere to be. I wasn't on a time crunch. I didn't need to race out of that town. And they were all within like walking distance, just a block or so from each of them. So I'm like, you know what? It's working again. Let's go back and make photographs. And so the photographs you'll see in the link below, those were all made on the second run. And I did process that first roll of film. I thought it was going to be blank, so I loaded it into a different camera I just wanted to test. And I skipped it to number 4, thinking if there's any of those candy store counter women photos, I would actually like to have one of those. I'll skip to number 4 and I'll assume the rest is blank. And it turns out that number 1 through 3 were blank and number 4 on were fine on this test camera, but it wasn't like something happened and maybe some of them came out. None of them. There was a blank roll of film. Camera wasn't working. But then the camera was. So use your instincts. If you sense something is wrong, something might be wrong. If something is wrong and you can make it right, make it right. If somebody says, uh-oh, I need to go and redo it, okay, just go do it. There's no, embarrassment to admitting to things not working out on the first try. The thing that matters most is getting the shot. In the photojournalist days, there was no excuse for not getting the shot. Just get the shot. All right. That's today's photography talk. If you're enjoying these, hit the subscribe button. If you can support, hit the Patreon. I'll be back next week. We'll talk more photography. As always, here's the good light.